Welcome to the latest edition of our AT Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions The Wave of the Future podcast series. I'm Helen Clegg, and I'm joined today by Frank Bilstein, a partner in AT Kearney's Düsseldorf office in Germany, and Nitin Godawat, a director in our analytics practice based in New Delhi, India. In today's topic, we'll be discussing the importance of pricing and how a new analytics tool called the Pricing Full Potential Analyzer, developed by AT Kearney, can predict profit gains that companies can make from better pricing. Frank, welcome to the podcast. I know you've done over 100 pricing projects during your career, so are an expert on the topic. Why is it difficult for companies to improve their pricing strategies?
Well, first of all, in the short run, pricing is the most important profit driver of any company. But pricing is both risky and complex. So think about the risk. Imagine you price your product too high and basically demand goes off a cliff and collapses and leaves your factories idle. That is something every manager dreads, and there is a cognitive bias at work here called loss aversion, which prevents us from reaping the full benefits of pricing. But even if we overcome this cognitive bias, pricing is really complex because it touches on so many aspects of corporate life. I mean, this is about pricing strategy, it is about selecting the right price structure, set the right price levels, and have your salespeople actually execute it in the field on a day-to-day basis. So basically it touches every commercial area. That's why it's not only risky, but also extremely complex.
Frank, you mentioned in AT Kearney's executive agenda paper on the Pricing Full Potential Analyzer tool that the development of the tool actually stemmed from a survey you conducted with over 1,600 businesses in 5 countries. What were the main questions you sought to answer in that survey?
What we set out to do was is there a way to determine a simple and straightforward approach to predict how much money a business can make from better pricing? And for that purpose, we came up with a very simple set of questions. First of all, we asked companies what their market position and gross margin was 3 years ago, how it has improved since then, and to what degree pricing actually contributed to that improvement, if there was an improvement. And then, if there was an improvement, to what degree they actually applied various degrees and implementation measures of pricing. So we really got to the bottom of what they eventually did.
And Frank, what were the key findings of the survey, and did those findings surprise you?
They certainly did surprise me. So let me start with the most surprising one. What we found was that we indeed can predict the profits from better pricing with just 2 variables. And those 2 variables are market share and gross margin. It is not the industry, it is not the country that the business resides in. So let's think about this for a second. The industry does not matter. What does matter statistically is what power you have in your market, which is measured through market share, and to what degree you have been already successful with your pricing on a day-to-day basis, which we capture in the gross margin. The second thing that we found was that there is a group of companies that we call the pricing Zen Masters that succeed in a unique way in their pricing. What they do is they, at least compared to all the other companies in the survey, are the least likely to not do anything. So they're the most likely to do something in terms of pricing. And if they do something, they really focus on just 1 or 2 actions. So as opposed to doing a whole suite of things, a whole consulting program with dozens and dozens of measures, they really just focus on 1 or 2 things and try to execute them well. And the commercial effect in terms of margin improvement stemming from that approach is just stunning. The pricing Zen Masters outperform all the other segments that we surveyed by a huge margin.
Nitin, I want to bring you in here to talk about the underlying analytics. As an analytics expert, how did you go about building the PFP analyzer tool from the survey data?
As Frank mentioned, we conducted a survey of more than 1,600 businesses with revenues ranging from $50 million to more than $2 billion across various industries and across various geographies. The respondents included the CXOs as well as mid-management professionals, in sales, planning, procurement, etc., who are directly or indirectly involved in the pricing decisions. The objective of the questionnaire was first, to get perspective on the pricing actions that the company has undertaken in last 3 years. Second, to understand additional leverage that the company has in terms of negotiating better price with their customers. And at the same time, finally also to understand if their suppliers could have charged higher prices from them. We also collected information on their current market share, gross margin, etc., and change of these metrics in last 3 years. Pricing Full Potential Analyzer was developed by determining the interrelationships between margin improvement and a number of factors like revenue, industry, size, geography, pricing actions, pricing skills, etc. We ensured that the influence of these factors is statistically significant and the range of margin improvement suggested by the analyzer has a high confidence level.
And Nitin, can you explain what the PFP Analyzer tool actually does and how it works?
Sure, Helen. The PFP Analyzer predicts how much margin improvement a business can make from better pricing initiatives, given their current market share, revenue, etc. So for a company that is interested to get a quick evaluation, we ask some basic questions, compare responses with other companies in similar market positions, and finally, recommend actions that they can undertake to achieve margin improvement over next few years. For example, a global automotive company based in Europe with 8% market share and 20% gross margin can add almost 3 points on gross margin through better pricing within next 3 years. In dollar terms, this is the equivalent of $275 million in additional profits for that company.
Frank, what would you say to companies that tell you they just can't improve their pricing or that better pricing doesn't work in their industry?
What we found in this survey was kind of a myth buster, really. On the one hand, we found that the typical excuse we hear from middle management, this doesn't work in my industry, I already elaborated that this does not apply. The industry is not the key driver of pricing success. But the second thing, which is even more fascinating that we found, is the better you are, the more you can still improve in pricing. So imagine we have a company that already enjoyed healthy margins and a strong market position 3 years ago. What we found is that exactly those companies have been able to improve their pricing the most over the past 3 years. And this relationship is actually linear, so there's no stopping to this. But when you think about it, it actually totally makes sense, because there is something that enables them to reap the benefits, and they just keep on doing it. So the two main excuses from middle management that we typically hear, this doesn't work in my industry, or we're already good enough, both of them were clearly refuted by our study.
And finally, Frank, as we come to the end of this podcast, I want to ask you one last question. How can companies access the tool to understand how much profit is at stake?
The best way to access the tool really is to just shoot me an email at frank.bilstein@atkearney.com. And all I need from you is really just 2-3 numbers. I plug them into the model and can give you an assessment literally within minutes.
Thanks, Frank. So this has been a really interesting discussion about the Pricing Full Potential Analyzer tool with Frank and Nitin. And just to summarize, the key facts that I've got from this podcast are that companies that are high performing when it comes to pricing strategy have a very high market share and gross margins. They work at expanding their market power, and they attribute most of their profit improvement to pricing strategies. Companies seeking to improve their pricing strategies can leverage a tool like the Pricing Full Potential Analyzer to understand exactly what is at stake. As Frank said earlier, there's always room for improvement. And on that note, I'd like to thank Frank Bilstein and Nitin Godawat for being my guests today. I'd also like to thank our production engineer, Tom Klein. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Wave of the Future. If you have any comments on this podcast or have a suggestion for a podcast topic, please share your thoughts via Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @ATKPAS. This has been an A.T. Kearney Procurement and Analytics Solutions podcast production. Join us again soon for our next Wave of the Future podcast.